What happens when a billionaire unexpectedly returns home, only to discover something so surprising that it shatters everything he thought he knew? This is the story of a man's unplanned homecoming that reveals a deep, life-changing secret involving his own son and a black maid. Stay with us till the end to witness how this twist of fate unfolds. David had always been a man of routine. His life was built around control. Control over his business empire, control over his home, and control over his time. As a billionaire, he prided himself on his ability to predict and manage every situation. But on this particular day, things were different. A series of delays had caused his flight back from Europe to be rescheduled, and rather than spending more time in the airport, David made the impulsive decision to return home earlier than expected. There was something about the idea of surprising his family that appealed to him, a break from the rigid schedules that defined his life. As he arrived at his mansion, nestled in the hills away from the hustle and bustle of the city, David immediately felt a strange sense of anticipation. His home was an impressive one, with towering columns, sprawling gardens, and a vast interior that screamed luxury at every turn. Yet today, something about it felt different. Normally, when he walked through the front door, his staff would greet him, and the sounds of daily life filled the space. But today, there was only silence. He stepped inside cautiously, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floors as he made his way through the grand foyer. His heart beat a little faster than usual, a sensation he couldn't quite place. His mind, usually consumed with business strategies, found itself focused on something entirely different: his family. His wife, Emma, had always been busy with her art, and his son, Luke, was at that age where he spent most of his time playing video games or talking to friends. David hadn't seen his son as much as he would have liked lately, always caught up in meetings and business trips. But now, as he walked through his own home, he felt a growing unease about the relationship with his own child. As he walked down the corridor toward the living room, faint voices reached his ears. At first it sounded like a casual conversation, but the tone caught his attention. There was laughter, genuine, warm laughter, and it made David pause. He hadn't heard that kind of laughter in a while, especially not from his son. He frowned, wondering who it could be. He thought perhaps it was a friend of Luke's, someone visiting. But as he peeked around the corner into the living room, what he saw froze him in place. There, sitting on the plush leather sofa, was his young son Luke, laughing and chatting with Sarah, the housemaid. Sarah had worked for David's family for years. She was a dedicated employee, professional and respectful, but he had never imagined her in such an intimate setting with his son. Luke looked completely at ease, as though Sarah wasn't just the maid, but a trusted friend. The way she was interacting with him, so casually, so comfortably, took David by surprise. Sarah was talking with Luke about something, her eyes sparkling, with a warmth David had never seen between them. She wasn't just cleaning or tidying up. She was engaging with Luke as if they shared something special, something that went beyond the typical employer-employee relationship. It was a moment David had never expected to witness, a moment that stirred something deep inside him. His son had grown closer to Sarah than he had ever realized. David stood there, unsure of what to do or say, as the realization began to settle in. He had missed something important, something crucial that he had overlooked in the rush of his career. David stood frozen in the doorway, unable to comprehend what was unfolding before him. His son Luke, who he had always assumed was just going about his usual routine, seemed so comfortable with Sarah, the maid. The laughter between them wasn't forced or superficial. It was real, natural, and it made David feel like an outsider in his own home. He had always prided himself on being a good father, but here was a bond forming between Sarah and Luke that he hadn't noticed, a connection that seemed far deeper than just a working relationship. The image of his son sharing stories, laughing, freely and talking with Sarah like they were old friends left David stunned. "Dad, you're back early," Luke exclaimed, his excitement a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere that hung in the room. His eyes were wide with surprise, but there was a hint of unease in his expression as well. Sarah, on the other hand, stood up quickly, her hands instinctively reaching to straighten her uniform, trying to look more formal than she felt. Her nervousness was palpable, but there was something in her eyes that told David this wasn't a situation that had spiraled out of control. It was something far more innocent. David took a deep breath, trying to calm the swirling thoughts in his mind. "Luke," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on here? Why are you two so close?" Luke looked down, his excitement dimming as the weight of his father's question sunk in. I didn't know how to tell you, Dad," he confessed. "Sarah's been helping me with stuff, things I didn't want to bother you with." In that moment, David understood. His son had been carrying burdens that he had failed to notice, and Sarah, despite her position, had become his confidant. David sat down, his mind racing as he processed the conversation unfolding before him. He had always prided himself on being a hands-on father, yet here he was, blindsided by the bond his son had formed with Sarah, the housemaid. His initial shock was slowly giving way to a deep sense of guilt. How had he missed this? How had he been so absorbed in his business that he hadn't noticed the subtle signs that his son was struggling? David turned his gaze toward Sarah, who had remained quiet, her eyes averted as if unsure how to respond. Her usual professional demeanor was gone, replaced by vulnerability. "Sarah," David finally said, his voice softer now, "I need to understand. I thought I knew what was happening in this house, but this is different." He paused, searching her face for an answer. She looked at him, her expression serious yet kind. "Mr. David, I never intended for it to be like this. Your son, he's been going through things that he couldn't talk to anyone about. I know it's not my place, but when he needed someone, I was there for him." David nodded slowly, his chest tightening. He had been so wrapped up in his empire that he hadn't seen how his son was quietly carrying the weight of the world. Luke had been feeling isolated, unable to share his thoughts or feelings with his parents. And Sarah, despite being in a position of service, had stepped in when no one else was available. David's guilt deepened, but so did his gratitude. He realized that Sarah had done something he couldn't. She had been there when his son needed her most. As the hours passed, David couldn't shake the weight of the revelation he had just uncovered. His son had been going through emotional struggles that David had been too distracted to notice. He watched Luke closely as they sat in silence, the tension hanging between them. The laughter and carefree moments he had just witnessed were a stark contrast to the worried look now on his son's face. Luke had always seemed like a bright and independent child, someone who could handle anything. But David now realized that beneath the surface, his son had been carrying burdens that no child should have to bear alone. Luke broke the silence, his voice low but clear. "Dad, I never wanted to make you feel bad. I didn't want to bother you. I know you're busy with work, and I didn't want to add to your stress. But sometimes I just felt lost." David's heart sank as he listened to his son's words. The honesty in Luke's voice was piercing, and the weight of it hit David harder than any business deal or financial setback ever could. He had been so focused on climbing the ladder of success that he had failed to notice that his own son was struggling with feelings of loneliness and insecurity. "I'm sorry, Luke," David whispered, his voice cracking. "I should have been there for you. I should have seen this." He looked at Sarah, who had remained in the background, silently observing the exchange. "Thank you for being there when I couldn't be." Sarah nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. The bond between her and Luke wasn't just about the help she provided, it was about trust. The trust David now realized he had failed to give his own son. And in that moment, David knew things had to change. He couldn't undo the past, but he could start being the father his son needed. The days following that conversation were filled with a mixture of reflection and growth for David. He spent more time at home, not just physically, but emotionally, reconnecting with his son in ways he never had before. Every evening, he made sure to sit down with Luke, even if it was just for a few minutes, to talk about his day, his feelings, and what had been on his mind. The bond that had once seemed distant began to rebuild, brick by brick. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of awkward silence, but slowly, David began to understand the weight his son had been carrying. Luke, for his part, seemed relieved to finally have a space where he could express himself without fear of being overlooked. He started to open up more, sharing not just his struggles, but also his triumphs and dreams. The conversations they had weren't always deep, but they were real. And for the first time in a long while, David realized that this was what truly mattered, being present for the people who loved you, no matter how chaotic life became. As for Sarah, she remained a part of their lives, but now David saw her differently. She was no longer just the maid in his house. She had become an integral part of their family's support system. Her role had shifted, not because of her job, but because of the trust and care she had shown toward his son. David thanked her once again, genuinely this time, for all she had done. The path ahead wasn't clear, and the mistakes of the past couldn't be undone. But David knew that the changes he was making now would shape a better future for his family. In the end, it wasn't wealth or success that defined him. It was the love and connection he built with those who mattered most. And in that moment, he knew he was on the right path. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with your friends. Your support helps us grow and bring more amazing content to you. Subscribe to Struggle Stories for more captivating tales and unexpected twists. Stay tuned for our next chapter. Your feedback means the world to us. Thank you for being part of this journey.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more. Hit the bell icon so you never miss out on our latest videos.